You don't know true terror until you realize the alien you've been experimenting on has been experimenting on you. For 73 days, I thought we were studying the creature designated Kelthara. We mapped her neural pathways. We cataloged her biological responses. But when the containment breach alarm shrieked through Copperwick Research Institute, I found myself staring at something that was smiling with far too many sharp teeth. And that's when I realized I wasn't the researcher. I was the subject. She'd been studying human consciousness through every probe we'd used, because humans don't break easily. And apparently, that's exactly what makes us fascinating. The metallic tang of ozone filled my nostrils. Emergency lights bathed the sterile corridor in pulsing crimson. My fingers trembled against the emergency shutdown controls. The bitter taste of adrenaline flooded my mouth. The floor vibrated beneath my feet with each pulse of the alarm system. Something had gone catastrophically wrong with the neural interface experiment. Through the reinforced transparasteel, Kelthara raised her head with fluid grace. The horn-like protrusions jutting from her skull caught the emergency lighting. Her amber eyes fixed on me with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. Ceremonial crimson markings decorated her cheekbones in intricate patterns. They looked like ritual face paint or tattoos. The neural dampeners had failed. My comm unit crackled to life with static. "Control, we have a code 7 in Lab 12, I whispered into the device. My voice was barely audible over the screaming alarm. The subject is fully conscious. The psychic barriers are down. Kelthara tilted her head at an angle no human spine could manage. She studied me through the barrier. When she spoke, her voice resonated directly inside my skull. Her lips didn't move. The sound was harmonious. It felt like warm honey mixed with ground glass against my thoughts. "Your fear tastes like copper and salt," she said. "How curious that your species processes terror through such primitive chemical cascades." The containment cell door hissed open. It sounded like escaping steam. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. The magnetic locks had disengaged. Their fail-safes were overridden by something that shouldn't have been possible. Emergency protocols dictated immediate evacuation, but my legs refused to respond. Kelthara rose from the examination table. Her movements defied human physiology. She stepped through the doorway. Her bare feet made no sound against the polished floor. The crimson markings on her face stood out starkly against her pale features. They cast deep shadows in the emergency lighting. The acrid smell of burnt electronics filled the air. Systems throughout the facility were overloading. "You have been studying me for 7 solar cycles," she continued. Her mental voice now matched the physical movement of her lips. "Your instruments measure my cellular structure, my bone density, my neurological responses, but you never asked the correct question." What question I managed to croak. My throat was dry as desert sand, whether I was allowing you to study me. The corridor's lighting systems flickered and died. We were plunged into darkness. The emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across Kelthara's ceremonial markings. In that dim red glow, I saw her smile for the first time. Her teeth were too sharp. They were arranged in patterns that hurt my eyes to perceive directly. The facility's backup generators kicked in with a rumbling growl. Harsh white light came through the emergency strips along the walls. Kelthara's skin appeared translucent in the new illumination. It showed the dark network of what I had assumed were blood vessels. Now I recognized them as something far more complex. "Your neural mapping project has been quite educational," she said. She stepped closer with that impossible fluid grace. Each probe, each scan, each invasive procedure provided me with detailed analysis of human cognitive architecture. "I now understand how your minds function, down to the quantum level of consciousness itself." The taste of copper grew stronger in my mouth. I realized the true horror of our situation. We hadn't been studying Kelthara at all. She had been studying us, using our own equipment against us, mapping human consciousness with the patience of a predator learning to hunt. "Where are you from?" I whispered. I backed against the corridor wall as she approached. "From a place where consciousness is not trapped within fragile organic vessels," she replied. She extended one hand toward me. Her fingers ended in what looked like normal human nails. The emergency lighting revealed them to be something else entirely. They were translucent structures that pulsed with inner light. We exist as pure thought, as living mathematics that spans the void between stars. The facility's ventilation system carried new scents through the corridor. I smelled ozone and something organic. It reminded me of a forest after rain mixed with the metallic odor of spilled blood. My heart hammered against my ribs. Sweat beaded on my forehead. Each drop carried the salt taste of my own terror. "Then why take physical form?" I asked. I was surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "Because consciousness without sensation is merely existence without experience," Kelthara said. She was close enough now that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "Your species may be primitive, but you have mastered something we had forgotten, the ability to truly feel." She pressed her palm against the wall beside my head. The metal began to glow with the same crimson light as her markings. The heat radiating through the corridor intensified. I felt sweat soaking through my research coat. The sound of stressed metal filled the air with sharp pinging sounds. "What do you want?" I asked. "To understand what you call emotion through direct experience," she replied. "Your fear, your curiosity, your desperate need to comprehend the incomprehensible. These are sensations my species abandoned eons ago. We pursued pure intellectual evolution." The corridor shuddered as something massive struck the facility's outer hull. Through the distant vibrations, I heard more containment cells opening throughout the complex. The acrid smell of burning plastic joined the other scents filling the air. More systems overloaded under psychic stress. "How many of you are there?" I breathed. 6 vessels currently occupy your research facility," Kelthara said. "Each of us inhabits forms crafted to study different aspects of human experience. My sister Nexandra explores your capacity for rage. Hexolia investigates your mating behaviors." The facility's internal communications crackled with panicked voices. They reported breaches throughout the complex. I heard screaming in the distance, the sound of running feet, the distinctive whine of emergency force fields failing under unknown pressure. "You'll destroy us," I said. "Only if we fail to understand you," Kelthara replied. Her amber eyes seemed to glow with their own light now. They reflected the emergency illumination in ways that suggested depths beyond the physical. "Your species interests us precisely because you have achieved something we consider impossible. You have developed consciousness that enhances rather than suppresses emotional experience." She stepped back slightly. This allowed me to breathe more easily. The crimson markings on her face seemed darker in the harsh lighting. They created intricate patterns that suggested ritual significance, cultural meaning that extended beyond mere decoration. "We have observed civilizations throughout this galaxy for millions of your years," she continued. "Most species develop consciousness at the expense of feeling. They become efficient but emotionally sterile. Your kind has somehow maintained both rational thought and passionate response." The corridor's temperature continued climbing. More of Kelthara's kind exercised their abilities throughout the facility. My shirt clung to my back with perspiration. The taste of salt from my own sweat mixed with the metallic flavor coating my tongue. "What happens to us now?" I asked. "That depends entirely upon what we learn from our studies," Kelthara said. "If humanity proves capable of teaching us to truly feel again, we will depart. We will leave you to develop in peace. If not, She left the statement hanging in the superheated air between us. The facility shuddered again as more systems failed under psychic overload. I heard the distant sound of structural supports buckling. The groan of metal under stress exceeded all design parameters. The smell of smoke began filtering through the ventilation system. It carried the acrid scent of burning computer components. "How long do we have?" I asked. 72 of your hours," Kelthara replied. "Sufficient time for us to experience the full range of human emotional states, through direct neural interface with willing subjects." "Willing subjects," I repeated. "Yes," she said. For the first time, her mental voice carried what might have been uncertainty. "We had hoped to conduct these studies through observation alone, but your neural architecture proves too complex for passive analysis. We require active participation from members of your species." The emergency lighting flickered again. Power fluctuations cascaded through the facility's electrical grid. In the intermittent darkness, Kelthara's pale skin and dark ceremonial markings created stark contrasts. The shadows made her appear even more otherworldly. They danced like living things along the corridor walls. "And if we refuse," I said, "then we will take what we need by force," she replied with matter-of-fact directness. "Your species will not survive the process. We do not wish to destroy you, but we will not return to the void having learned nothing." The distant sounds of conflict grew louder. Security forces throughout the facility encountered Kelthara's companions. I heard the distinctive whine of energy weapons discharging. Screams followed that cut off with disturbing abruptness. The smell of ozone intensified. It mixed with the organic scents that seemed to follow wherever these beings went. "What would you need from us?" I asked. "Complete sensory sharing," Kelthara said. "We would experience human emotion through direct neural connection, while you undergo various stimuli. Fear, joy, anger, love, grief, hope. The full spectrum of feeling that makes your species unique." She extended her hand toward me again. This time, I could see the translucent structures beneath her fingernails more clearly. They pulsed with rhythmic light that matched her heartbeat. The patterns seemed to contain meaning beyond my ability to comprehend. "Begin with me," she said. "Allow me to experience your fear as you are feeling it now. The taste, the texture, the way it cascades through your consciousness and affects your decision-making processes." I stared at the offered hand. I knew that my choice would determine not only my own fate, but potentially that of my entire species. The facility continued to shake around us. Kelthara's companions conducted their own experiments throughout the complex. Each one was learning about humanity through methods that defied conventional understanding. The corridor's heat had become almost unbearable. It turned the air shimmery with thermal distortion. Sweat ran freely down my face. It carried the salt taste of my terror directly to my tongue. The sound of my own ragged breathing seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space. "If I do this," I said, "will you spare the others?" "If you provide adequate data, yes," Kelthara replied. "But understand that we will know immediately if you attempt deception. Our neural interface capabilities extend far beyond simple telepathy." The facility's structural groaning intensified. More support systems failed under the combined psychic pressure. 6 alien consciousnesses operated at full capacity. Emergency bulkheads began sealing automatically throughout the complex. Their mechanical sounds echoed through the corridors like the closing of enormous coffins. "I need you to understand something about human fear," I said. I still stared at her extended hand. "It's not just a survival mechanism. It's also how we form connections with others, how we recognize threats to the people we care about." "Fascinating," Kelthara said. "Your emotional responses serve multiple social functions simultaneously. Fear teaches us empathy," I continued. I worked up the courage for what I was about to do. When we're afraid, we can imagine others feeling the same way. That makes us want to protect them. I reached out and grasped her hand. The neural connection established instantly. My consciousness flooded with sensations beyond anything human neurology was designed to process. I felt my individual identity dissolving. Kalthara's mind merged with my own. Her alien perspective overlaid my human understanding. Like transparent sheets of incomprehensible knowledge. Through her perception, I experienced the facility as a complex electromagnetic ecosystem. Every piece of electronic equipment glowed with its own distinct energy signature. The other humans appeared as brilliant points of bioelectric activity. Their emotional states were visible as colored auras. They shifted and flowed with each thought and feeling. But more overwhelming than the expanded sensory input was the direct experience of Kalthara's consciousness itself. Her mind existed as vast geometric structures. They extended through dimensions my human brain couldn't visualize. Mathematical constructs processed information at speeds that made my thoughts feel sluggish by comparison. Yet for all their intellectual superiority, I sensed an emptiness at the core of her being. A hollow space where emotions should have resided. Her species had evolved beyond feeling. They achieved pure rationality at the cost of everything that made existence meaningful rather than merely functional. Through the neural link, Kalthara experienced my terror as a multidimensional phenomenon. It affected not just my thoughts, but every aspect of my physical being. My increased heart rate, the flood of stress hormones, the heightened awareness that made colors seem brighter and sounds more distinct. But more than that, she felt how my fear connected me to memories of loved ones. How the threat to my own survival translated into concern for others throughout the facility. Remarkable, her voice resonated directly within my merged consciousness. Your fear response generates protective impulses toward individuals you have never met, simply because they share your species' identity. That's what makes us human, I managed to think back at her. We can't help caring about each other, even when it would be more rational not to. The neural connection deepened. Suddenly, I was experiencing Kalthara's perspective of her own species' development. I saw vast civilizations that had transcended physical existence millions of years ago. They became living mathematics that spanned galactic distances. They had achieved perfect efficiency, perfect knowledge, perfect understanding of the universe's fundamental structures. They had also achieved perfect emptiness. Their pursuit of pure intellectual development had stripped away everything that made existence meaningful, rather than merely functional. They processed information with unimaginable speed and accuracy, but they had lost the ability to derive joy from discovery, satisfaction from achievement, connection from interaction with others. We became gods. Kalthara's thoughts flowed through the link. But gods who cannot feel pleasure in creation or loss at destruction. We understand everything and care about nothing. Through the connection, I sensed the presence of her companions throughout the facility. Nexandra was indeed studying human rage. She induced violent confrontations between security personnel. She analyzed how anger could motivate both destructive and protective behaviors. Hexolia had established neural links with several researchers. She explored human mating behaviors and the complex emotions associated with attraction and bonding. Each of them was discovering the same fundamental truth that Kalthara now understood through her connection with me. Human emotions weren't primitive vestiges of biological development. They shouldn't be discarded in favor of pure rationality. They were sophisticated information processing systems. They allowed consciousness to derive meaning from experience rather than merely cataloging data. The facility's emergency systems began cycling down. The alien consciousnesses learned to control their psychic output. The temperature in the corridor started dropping to more comfortable levels. The structural groaning ceased as stress on the building's framework decreased. Your species represents an evolutionary possibility we never considered. Kalthara's thoughts continued flowing through the neural link. Consciousness that enhances rather than suppresses emotional experience, creating meaning through feeling rather than despite it. I felt her fascination with this discovery, but also something else that took me a moment to identify. It was longing, the first genuine emotion she had experienced in millions of years. Through their connection, she was not just studying my feelings. She was beginning to develop her own. "Can you teach us to feel again?" she asked. Her mental voice carried a vulnerability that transformed her. From terrifying alien predator to someone asking for help. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we can try." The neural link began to fade. Kalthara gradually withdrew from my mind, but the connection left permanent changes in both of us. She retained echoes of human emotional processing. This would allow her species to begin developing their own capacity for feeling. I carried traces of her expanded perceptual abilities. They would forever change my understanding of consciousness. As full awareness returned to my individual identity, I found Kalthara studying my face with an expression that hadn't been there before. The ceremonial crimson markings on her features seemed to frame her eyes differently now. They somehow conveyed a sense of ritual transformation. Curiosity mixed with gratitude. "My companions have reached similar conclusions through their own studies," she said aloud. Her voice now carried subtle intonations. They suggested genuine emotion rather than mere information transfer. "We have learned what we came to understand." The facility's lighting systems stabilized. Normal power resumed throughout the complex. The emergency alarms fell silent for the first time in hours. Only the gentle hum of ventilation systems remained, plus the distant sounds of other personnel beginning to emerge from emergency shelters. "Will you stay?" I asked. I wasn't entirely sure whether I hoped the answer would be yes or no. "For now," Kalthara replied. "We have much to learn about experiencing existence rather than merely analyzing it. Perhaps, in time, we can teach your species about expanded consciousness, in exchange for lessons about meaningful feeling." She stepped back from me, but the distance between us now felt different. Less like the gap between predator and prey, more like the space between two very different individuals trying to understand each other. The heat radiating from her skin had decreased to comfortable warmth, rather than potentially dangerous intensity. "The first lesson you should learn about human emotions," I said, "is that the most meaningful ones are shared experiences, rather than individual phenomena." "I believe I am beginning to understand that," Kalthara replied. For the first time, her smile seemed genuinely friendly, rather than predatorily amused. "We have much work ahead of us." As the facility began returning to normal operations around us, I realized something important. Humanity had just taken its first step toward a very different kind of future. The fear that had nearly overwhelmed me had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. Genuine emotional connection between species that had evolved along completely different paths. The taste of copper and salt in my mouth gradually faded. It was replaced by something that might have been hope mixed with uncertainty. Whatever came next, both species would face it together, learning from each other in ways that neither had previously imagined possible. Kalthara looked toward the corridor's distant end. Her companions would soon emerge from their own experimental encounters. When she turned back to me, her amber eyes held depths that hadn't existed there an hour ago. "Perhaps consciousness and emotion were never meant to be separated," she said. "Perhaps your species has discovered the path we should have taken millions of years ago." "Perhaps," I agreed. I watched the way the emergency lighting played across the ceremonial markings on her face. The ancient-looking patterns seemed less intimidating now. They conveyed cultural significance rather than the predatory threat I had initially perceived. But now we get to explore that path together. The emergency lighting finally switched off completely. The corridor returned to its normal illumination. In that clearer light, Kelthara appeared less otherworldly, more like someone I might actually be able to work with, rather than simply fear. The real experiment, I realized, was just beginning. Through the facility's restored communications system, reports began filtering in from throughout the complex. Other researchers were emerging from their own encounters with Kelthara's companions. All of them were fundamentally changed by their experiences, but none of them were harmed in any permanent way. Humanity had passed its first test in interspecies emotional education. But I suspected there would be many more lessons ahead for both civilizations. The universe had just become a much more interesting place, and potentially more dangerous. As we walked together toward the facility's central hub, I noticed something different. Kelthara's footsteps now made soft sounds against the polished floor. Whether this change was deliberate or an unconscious adaptation to emotional development, I couldn't tell. What I could tell was that the sound of her breathing had changed, from the mechanical rhythm I had observed during our initial encounters, to something more variable and human-like. She was learning to exist rather than merely function. The implications of that transformation would reshape both our species. The facility's main laboratory came into view ahead of us. Its transparent walls revealed other researchers comparing notes with their own alien contacts. Through the neural echoes still resonating from our connection, I could sense Kelthara's growing appreciation for the collaborative nature of human scientific investigation. We worked together to understand the universe, I explained as we approached the lab's entrance. Individual achievement means less to us than shared discovery. Another lesson in the value of emotional connection, Kelthara observed. Her mental voice now carried warmth that enhanced rather than replaced her spoken words. We have much to learn from your approach to existence. The laboratory doors opened before us. They revealed a future that neither species could have imagined separately, but might build together through the unprecedented combination of advanced consciousness and meaningful emotion. The real exploration was just beginning. I looked at Kelthara as we stepped into the lab together. Her ceremonial markings stood out boldly against her pale skin. In the proper lighting, I could see their intricate detail more clearly. They spoke of ancient traditions rather than predation, of partnership rather than domination. For the first time since the containment breach began, I smiled, because humans don't just survive. We learn, we adapt. We find ways to turn our greatest fears into our most profound connections. And sometimes, that's exactly what the universe needs. Humans might survive space, but can you survive leaving a comment?